What would you do if marrying a 71-year-old woman was the only way to survive crushing debt? But 7 days after the wedding, you discovered that her fortune was cursed, her past was haunted, and your life was now in danger. And this chilling story of secrets, survival, and sacrifice. One desperate law student learns that the real price of wealth isn't money, but memory. Could you live in a house that remembers everything, including the people it has destroyed? Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And comment below where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now sit back and watch until the end, because this story will leave you breathless. The air in the small town of Denton smelled of cut grass and sun-warmed asphalt. July in Texas came with its own kind of punishment. But Mark Davis had long grown used to sweating through his shirt by the time he got to campus. The law library's cold interior was his only escape from the reality of his sinking life. He sat in the back corner, as always, a thick civil procedures textbook open in front of him. But his eyes weren't moving. They stared blankly at a page he'd read a dozen times. His mind kept wandering to the rent notice stuck to the fridge, and the voicemail from his sister that he hadn't returned. She needed medicine again. She was only 15, and she had no one else but him. Mark was smart, but intelligence doesn't erase debt. His scholarships covered tuition, but not food, not shelter, and certainly not the kind of help his sister needed. He had taken 2 part-time jobs, sold everything he could, and still, he was drowning that afternoon. A text changed his life. Are you still interested in unconventional opportunities? Serious inquiry. Well-paid discretion required. It came from an old classmate, Tyler, who had dropped out the year before. Mark replied with one word, yes. Later that evening, Mark stood outside a wrought iron gate on the edge of town. It curved into arches that framed a gravel driveway, flanked by hedges trimmed to perfection. At the far end stood the largest house he had ever seen. Not a house, a mansion, silent, regal, and haunting. The gate clicked open. He walked inside. The mansion smelled of cedar and age. The walls were filled with oil paintings of men and women long gone, their eyes painted with unsettling precision. A butler, impossibly old, led him to a sunroom where the curtains were half drawn. She sat in a chair near the light. Eleanor. Brookstad. Her hair was silvery white and tied into a low bun. She wore a soft mauve shawl draped over a cream blouse. Her eyes were sharp and blue, and her skin bore the map of a lifelong lived. Mark Davis, she said, her voice smooth. Please, sit. He obeyed. I will not waste your time, she said. I need companionship, and you need money. Mark nodded slowly. He tried to steady her face, but she was unreadable. I want a husband, legally. On paper, no affection is required, no intimacy. You will live here, appear by my side when requested, and in exchange, I will pay off your student debt in full, and provide a monthly allowance. Mark's throat went dry. Why me? Eleanor smiled faintly. Because you are desperate. And because I believe desperate people make the best listeners. There was silence. Only the ticking of an antique clock filled the space. I need one more thing from you, she said. What? Loyalty. Absolute loyalty. Mark hesitated. For how long? 1 year. That is all I ask. Then you may go debt-free. It was madness, but madness wears many faces. And Mark, who once believed in law and justice and the clean order of things, now believed in surviving. I'll do it, he said. 3 days later, they stood before a judge in a quiet courtroom. Eleanor wore a white hat. Mark wore the same suit he had borrowed for a scholarship interview. The papers were signed. Just like that, he became Mark Brooks. They went home in silence. No guests, no honeymoon. Just a long ride in her vintage car with leather seats that smelled like old perfume. That night, As Mark unpacked his single suitcase into a room far down the hall from Eleanor's, he noticed something strange. The dresser had 7 drawers, but the third one was locked. On the surface, it meant nothing. But for someone like Mark's, someone who had always needed to know why the lock whispered a question, by the end of the week, he would find the key. And once he did, nothing would be the same. The mornings at the Brooks estate were so quiet, they made Mark uncomfortable. No passing cars, no birds chirping, no human voices. Just the creak of wood and the soft humming of a house that had grown used to being alone. He woke up early, dressed in clothes Eleanor had arranged for him: pressed shirts, slacks, shoes that fit too perfectly in, went to the breakfast room. It was a room he didn't even know existed until the butler pointed it out on his second day. Eleanor was already there, seated at the far end of a table to long for 2 people. She sipped black coffee from fine china and read a newspaper, printed on crisp ivory paper. Her expression never changed. "Morning," Mark said each day, trying to find a tone between politeness and familiarity. Eleanor would nod once and answer with the same word, "Morning." The silence after that felt like pages waiting to be filled. By the 4th day, Mark stopped trying to force small talk. He ate in silence, listening to the distant clink of silverware, then disappeared into the mansion's endless corridors. He spent his hours wandering. There were more than 20 rooms, each carefully decorated with antiques and paintings and books, whose spines cracked like dried leaves. He tried the doors to each room, but some were sealed shut or led to dust-covered storage. Others revealed glimpses of a different time: a nursery with faded wallpaper, a ballroom with a cracked chandelier, a library with no light bulbs. The mansion didn't feel haunted, not in the way horror movies painted ghosts and shadows. But there was something else. A weight, a sense that eyes once full of life had stared long and hard into these walls and left part of their sorrow behind. By the 6th night, he stopped, closing his bedroom door. Somehow it made him feel less trapped. That was also the night he found the key. It happened accidentally. He had gone to the study, Eleanor's favorite room, looking for something to read. The door had been slightly ajar. He knocked once, and when no one answered, he stepped inside. The room smelled like lavender and old paper. Shelves lined every wall. A fireplace sat cold and unused. In the corner, a globe rested beside a cabinet filled with glass, decanters of liquor that didn't look like it had been touched in years. He moved toward the desk. It was an enormous piece of mahogany carved with floral patterns along the edges. On top were stacks of letters, a fountain pen, and a leather-bound journal. He didn't open anything, but something about the drawer caught his eye. It was slightly open, just enough to reveal a velvet lining and something small inside. Mark pulled it open slowly. There it was, an antique brass key. Not old in the way of rusted tools, but aged like a treasure kept safe through generations. Its teeth were sharp. The handle was shaped like a rose, blooming sideways. He held it up to the light, marveling at the craftsmanship. No label, no tag. Looking for something. Mark froze. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face unreadable as ever. He put the key down at once. "I was looking for a book. I didn't mean to pry." Her eyes stayed on him a moment too long. "That key opens a room that hasn't been entered in many years. I keep it as a reminder of that some doors are better left closed." Mark nodded, pretending to understand. But as she turned and walked away, the air felt colder than before. That night, the key haunted him. He couldn't sleep. He kept hearing things at first. It was just the wind brushing against the windows. Then it was the sound of wood shifting. A door slamming 2 floors down. Footsteps, light, careful, distant. He sat up in bed, sweat forming along his brow. His phone showed the time. It was well past midnight. He stepped into the hall and listened. Nothing, just silence. But the feeling didn't leave him. The feeling that the mansion had exhaled, that something had stirred in response to his touch. By morning, he had made up his mind he would find the door the key belonged to. The next afternoon, Eleanor left for a doctor's appointment. She took the chauffeur and told Mark she'd be gone until evening. It was the first time he'd been alone since the wedding. He waited 10 minutes after the car disappeared down the driveway, then retrieved the key from where he had seen it last. It was exactly where he had left it, tucked inside the drawer, lying still as if it had never moved. He held it tightly in his palm as he roamed the halls, room by room. He tried the doors he knew were locked, one by one. The key didn't fit any of them. Until he reached the east wing. It was the only part of the mansion that remained untouched since he arrived. The air there smelled different, dustier. The wallpaper was cracked, and the wooden floor creaked louder than anywhere else. At the very end of the hallway, behind a faded curtain, was a door almost invisible in the wall's design. Plain, no label, no sign. Mark inserted the key. It fit. His breath caught as he turned it slowly. Click. The door opened with a moan, revealing a small room cloaked in shadows. He stepped inside. The air smelled of parchment and cedar. A single window let in light that fell across shelves. Hundreds of them, each packed with letters, photographs, and trinkets. There were old boxers labeled with years written out in elegant cursive: 1971, 1983, 1995. There were portraits, too. One of Eleanor, much younger, wearing pearls and smiling beside a man with striking eyes and a sharp jawline. Mark recognized the man. He had seen that face before, in one of the oil paintings in the main hall. He walked deeper inside. The letters were handwritten. Some were opened, others remained sealed with wax. Curiosity burned in him like fire. He picked one envelope at random. It was addressed to someone named Judith and signed Eleanor. The first line read, "I cannot keep pretending that Henry was the man I thought he was. The night he disappeared, everything I knew about my life shattered." Mark stared at the words, "disappeared." The door behind him creaked. He turned quickly. No one was there, still. He shut it and locked it from the inside. For the next hour, Mark read letter after letter, page after page. Each one told a piece of a larger story. A story about Eleanor's marriage, about donations to charities that vanished, about scandals buried beneath lawsuits, about a tragedy that forced her into hiding. One letter made his blood run cold. It read, "They said the Brooks curse began with a betrayal. That every man who takes our name without love is doomed to suffer. I didn't believe it. Until Henry. Until everything fell apart. And now I fear it will begin again." Mark dropped the letter. He looked around the room. The walls didn't feel silent anymore. They felt like they were watching him. Mark didn't leave the hidden room for hours. The small space was colder than the rest of the mansion, though no vents were visible. It felt untouched by time, preserved in stillness, like a shrine forgotten on purpose. The more he read, the more confused he became. Each letter revealed another crack in the image Eleanor projected to the world. She hadn't always been the calm, poised woman who sipped tea at dawn and walked the garden in silence. Once, she had been fierce, alive at the heart of things. She had built charities, thrown galas, spoken at city halls. Her name had been on buildings. Her face had graced newspapers. And then, it all vanished. The letters didn't say why outright. They danced around it, using phrases like the accident and the scandal, and what Henry did. But Henry, her late husband, was the constant. Every letter seemed to orbit his name. Mark finally folded the last envelope he could stomach and stood. His hands were cold. His back hurt from sitting on the wooden stool. When he stepped out into the hallway, he locked the door again behind him, placing the key in his pocket instead of returning it. A strange mix of guilt and adrenaline followed him as he made his way back to his room. Eleanor returned that evening. She didn't mention the key. She didn't ask about his day. But during dinner, she stared at him longer than usual. Her eyes, though sharp, carried no anger, only a question. She never spoke aloud. That night, Mark dreamt of fire. He stood in the east wing, and every door burned. Behind each one, a voice called his name. He ran toward the hidden room, only to find it swallowed in black smoke. A figure stood inside, a woman in pearls. He woke up with a scream stuck in his throat. The next morning, Eleanor wasn't at the breakfast table. A note waited in her place. "Mark, I am resting in the garden. Join me later if you wish. E." The handwriting was delicate but controlled, just like her. He read it twice before folding it and putting it in his pocket next to the key. Mark didn't go to the garden right away. He went back to the room. This time, he brought a flashlight and gloves. He had no idea why he felt the need to be careful, but something about the dust, the brittle paper, and the age of everything made him cautious. He went straight for the boxers, labeled 1981 and 1982. Curious about the period just before Henry disappeared. One letter stood out. It was marked, "Personal, to be destroyed if found," in Eleanor's handwriting. He opened it. "If anyone is reading this, I have broken my promise. I told myself I would never write about that night, that if I put it on paper, it would become real again. But silence is a prison, and I am tired of living in one." Henry did not die. Vanished. And when the fire started, I knew it was not an accident. The Brooks family has always kept secrets, but this one they buried deep. He was trying to find the original deed, the one tied to the inheritance, the one grandfather signed, in blood and wine. I laughed at him, said curses were for fools. But after what happened, after the blood on the floor and the missing ledger and the voice that called my name from a locked room, I stopped laughing. I stayed quiet. But the curse does not sleep. And if you married me without love, Mark, then God help you. Mark dropped the letter. His heart pounded. His name. In the letter, his breath caught as he read it again. It was impossible. The letter was dated years before he had even been born. Eleanor was in the garden when he found her. She sat in a white iron chair, surrounded by hydrangeas and stone paths, shaped like vines. A tray beside her held tea, untouched. She didn't look up when he approached. Mark stood silently, waiting. "You found the room," she said, without turning her head. He sat across from her. "I did." She sipped her tea, then placed the cup down gently. "I knew you would." "How did you know?" "Because I was once you. Curious, needing answers, thinking knowledge would bring peace. It didn't. It brought fire," she said, looking into the sky. "And the fire burned everything I loved." Mark swallowed hard. What happened to Henry? Eleanor finally met his eyes. He got too close to the truth. Mark leaned forward. "You said the Brooks family hid something. Something in the inheritance." Eleanor tilted her head. "Do you believe in generational sin?" "I believe in consequences." She smiled faintly. "A good answer." There was a long pause. "I married you because I thought it would be safe," she said. "That if I chose someone outside the bloodline, someone unaware, I could end the cycle. But now I see I was only delaying the inevitable." Mark didn't move. "I'm not in danger, am I?" he asked softly. Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out a coin. It was old silver, the edges worn smooth. "Flip this," she said. "If it lands on heads, you stay. If it's tails, you run." He looked at her in disbelief. "I'm serious," she said, her voice calm. It's the coin my father used to decide whether to build this mansion or burn the original down. Everything in this family is decided by chance. Mark took the coin. It was warm. He flipped it. It never landed. A sudden wind swept through the garden and carried it into the rose bushes. They both watched it disappear. Eleanor said nothing, but something in her face shifted, a sadness that looked too old to describe. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He searched the library for anything books on the Brooks family. On the land, on the mansion's blueprints. He found one thing. A newspaper clipping from over 40 years ago. Philanthropist gala ends in tragedy. Guest vanishes in mysterious fire. A photo showed Eleanor in a red dress, Henry beside her smiling. The caption named another man, a cousin, Thomas Brooks. Also vanished, presumed dead. The article suggested foul play, but no one was ever charged by the end of the week. Mark felt like he was being watched. Shadows stretched too long across hallways. Doors he had closed were found open. His phone went missing for a day, only to be discovered inside a drawer he hadn't touched. The butler avoided his gaze. Eleanor had stopped coming to meals when he asked the housekeeper where she was. The woman whispered, "She's preparing." "For what?" he asked. But she only crossed herself and walked away. One night, unable to bear the silence, Mark returned to the hidden room. He lit a candle and sat among the letters. He found one final envelope, tucked behind a drawer panel. This one was sealed. With red wax, he cracked it open. "Mark, if you are reading this, it means the coin has been lost again. You must go to the cellar. Beneath the third stone on the left wall is the original ledger. Take it and burn it. If you do not, they will come for you. And this time, they will not be gentle." Mark stood up so fast he knocked the stool over. He ran through the corridor, down the marble steps, past the cold kitchen, into the cellar. There, behind crates and old wine racks, he found the wall, third stone. He pried it open with shaking fingers. Behind it, wrapped in velvet, was a book, black, leather. Gold edges dot the Brooks family ledger, and stamped on the inside, "He who marries without love shall pay in blood." The velvet felt cold in Mark's hands. The ledger, thick and ancient, pulsed like it carried its own breath. Bound in cracked black leather, its golden lettering shimmered under the single hanging bulb in the cellar. He didn't want to open it. Yet every second he stood holding it, he felt something beneath his skin, like the book was waiting for him. Slowly, he pulled the velvet back inside. The first page bore no words. Only a symbol on ornate circle with 3 roses, each dripping a single drop of crimson ink. Beneath it, a line was scrawled in a language Mark didn't recognize. He turned the page. Names, dates, places. Brooks. Every generation had a section. Every marriage recorded. Every child born into the family written in careful ink. With each page, the ink grew darker. The script changed from elegant to urgent. Some lines had been crossed out. Some names rewritten. Several pages carried marks beside the entry symbols that repeated. He flipped faster, then he found her, Eleanor. Rose Brooks born, 1947 married. Henry Charles Brooks, 1974 status. Bound beside her name, the symbol. Again 3 roses, bleeding. Then on the next line, widowhood not sufficient to break the binding. Only blood or truth. Mark's mouth went dry. He searched for his name. It wasn't there. But on the final page, freshly inked, he saw something that stopped his breath. A blank line. Under Eleanor's entry, someone had drawn a new space. The ink was still slightly wet. Next to spouse, the space had been left empty. A pen lay nearby. Someone had been waiting to write it. He slammed the book shut. The room felt tighter now. The walls closer. A draft circled the cellar as though the air itself was reacting to what he had found. He wrapped the ledger back in the velvet, shoved it into his coat, and ran upstairs without looking back. In the study, Eleanor waited. She sat by the window, her profile outlined in fading sunlight. Her shawl was the color of ash, and her hands were folded across her lap. When she turned to him, her expression didn't change. Only her eyes moved slowly with caution. "You found it," she said. "I did, and you read it." "I did," she sighed. A sound like the closing of a door. "You were never supposed to see that book." Mark took a step forward. "You wrote me a letter, told me to find it, to burn it." Eleanor blinked slowly. "No, Mark, I didn't." He froze. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Once the ledger is read, it cannot be unread. It remembers." "I don't care what it remembers," Mark snapped. "What have you done to me?" Eleanor stood, slowly, her knees cracking slightly as she moved. "The curse was never about wealth or punishment," she said. "It was about forgetting. The Brooks men, every one of them took power they didn't earn. And with every generation, the price grew steeper. I thought I had ended it. When Henry vanished, I sealed the room, hid the key, buried the stories. Why did you marry me then?" "I hoped a new name would break the chain," she whispered. "I was wrong." Mark pulled the ledger out and placed it on the table between them. "I saw your status," it said, bound. "What does that mean?" Eleanor looked away. Her lips trembled. "It means I carry the weight of the blood, that my life is not mine until the truth is spoken." "What truth?" She reached into a drawer and pulled out a photograph. It was of Henry, younger, standing on the mansion's front steps. Next to him was a woman, not Eleanor, younger, blonde, holding a child. "That was Judith," Eleanor said. "My sister." Mark's head snapped up. "I thought, yes. You thought I was an only child. Everyone did." She placed the photo down and traced her finger along the edge. "She disappeared the year after Henry and I were married. Everyone believed she had gone to Europe. In truth, she vanished. Like Henry, like Thomas, like the others. She met his eyes again. "There are more rooms in this house, Mark. Rooms you haven't seen. And one of them is filled with portraits. Each one of someone who tried to break the line." Mark's skin crawled. "Take me there." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded once. They walked through the west wing where the floors creaked louder and the air smelled of dust and roses. Eleanor used the thin iron key to unlock a narrow door behind an old tapestry. The hallway beyond was lined with stone. Dampness clung to the walls. A single bulb flickered above as they moved down the steps. Finally, they reached a large wooden door. Eleanor paused. "When you see them, do not speak. Just listen." She opened the door. The room beyond was colder than ice. Paintings filled every wall. Hundreds of them. Each one was a portrait. Men, women, some young, some old. Each bore the same strange quality eyes, painted with uncanny realism, as though they were not looking at the viewer, but through them. Mark walked slowly, his fingers numb. In the center of the room was a pedestal. A single painting rested upon it. It was unfinished. The outline of a man, brown hair, tall shoulders. No face yet, no name. Mark stared. Eleanor stood beside him, unmoving. "That one," she said softly, "is yours." His blood froze. "No, it always paints itself when the curse selects a new soul. You opened the ledger. You married into the bloodline. It has chosen you." Mark stepped back. "This is madness. I didn't believe in any of this." "You don't have to believe in it," she said. "It believes in you." He turned to her. "Then tell me how to stop it." She stepped closer. "You must return to the first portrait, the one that started it all. Destroy it." But no one has ever succeeded. The painting remakes itself. The curse protects its origin. Mark didn't blink. Where is it? She held his gaze for a long moment, then whispered, behind the mirror. That night, Mark went to the ballroom. The mirror stood 20 feet tall, framed in gold. Its surface shimmered under moonlight, like still water. He remembered it from his first day. Now he saw it differently. He approached with slow steps. Each footfall echoed like a warning. At the base of the mirror, he found a latch, rusted hidden. He pried it open. Behind the glass, a chamber, and inside one painting, a man, eyes as dark as coal. A smirk stretched unnaturally wide, a hand resting on a book. The original ledger, a single name carved into the frame. Solomon Brooks. Mark stared at the face. It looked exactly like him, only older and smiling. Mark stumbled backward from the mirror, nearly losing his balance as the candlelight flickered violently in the ballroom silence. The face behind the glass continued to grin. Solomon Brooks. His features were unmistakably Mark's down too. The slant of the brow, the curve of the lips, the intensity in the eyes. But it was not a mere resemblance. It was something deeper, a reflection of blood, of something passed down through veins and memory. He stared at the name carved into the gold frame again. Solomon Brooks, born 1822, died unknown. There was no death date. Mark whispered aloud, "What are you?" His voice echoed back at him, hollow and unanswered. He pressed his hand to the glass. It was warm, not just room temperature, warm but pulsing, almost like skin. He jerked back, heart racing, breath coming fast. Then, behind him, something creaked. He turned. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the ballroom, her shawl wrapped tightly around her, her eyes tired but watchful. "You saw him," she said softly. "Why? Does he look like me?" "Because he is you." Mark's mouth went dry. "That's impossible." "No, it's tragic." She walked toward the mirror and stood beside him. Solomon Brooks was the first of us, the one who built the fortune, the one who made the bargain. "What kind of bargain?" Eleanor reached into her shawl and pulled out a folded letter. The paper was yellowed, cracked at the folds. She handed it to him. Mark unfolded it. "To my descendants, wealth is a river. It flows where blood has been spilled. I have signed this pact not for love or legacy, but for dominion. In exchange, the line will thrive, but only if bound by loyalty, sealed in union, and kept secret. Let none marry without intent. Let none take the name without reverence. The key will remain, the ledger will record, and the portraits will remember. And when the time comes, I will return. Not in flesh, but in reflection. Watch for the mirror. Watch for me. S.B." Mark dropped the letter as if it burned. "You're telling me this man, this Solomon, is still alive?" Eleanor's voice was quiet. "He is not alive, but he is not dead either. He exists where memory lives, where blood repeats. He reclaims a piece of every soul who binds themselves to this family." Mark could barely breathe. "Then what happens to me?" "If you don't break the chain," she said, "you become part of it." He stepped away from the mirror. "This is a nightmare." "It's a legacy," Eleanor corrected. "And every legacy has a cost." Mark shook his head. "You knew this, and you still brought me into it." She looked away, ashamed. "I was alone. I was tired. I thought perhaps love was not the only answer. Perhaps choice could change fate. I was wrong." He turned from her, rage boiling under his skin. "You could have told me, given me a chance. I wanted to spare you. But there is no sparing. Anymore." Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed from the hallway. A knock. One. Then two. Then silence. Eleanor stiffened. "He's here," she whispered. "Who?" Before she could answer, the door swung open. A tall man entered the ballroom. His suit was dark gray, tailored perfectly. His eyes were pale green. His hair, streaked with silver, was combed back with precision. He carried a cane, but his steps were fluid. Eleanor's face paled. "Thomas." Mark stared at the man, confused. "But he's supposed to be dead." The article said. "I let them think I had died," the man said calmly. "I needed time. I needed to find what was mine." "Thomas Brooks," Eleanor said with clenched teeth. "Cousin of Henry. An heir to a lie." Thomas smiled. "I see the house has chosen again." He looked at Mark. "You wear it well." Mark stepped between him and Eleanor. "What do you want?" "Only what should have always been mine," Thomas said. "The ledger. The name. The key." "You disappeared for a reason," Eleanor said coldly. "You were part of the fire. Part of what destroyed everything." "Fire purifies," he answered. "It burns the weak away. Only the strong survive. And now the ledger has passed to someone new. Someone who still has a choice." Mark's chest tightened. "What kind of choice?" Thomas took another step closer. "Destroy the mirror. Burn the ledger. End the curse and the family along with it. Or keep the power. Take your place. You are already halfway there." "I don't want power." Thomas laughed once. "Everyone says that in the beginning." He turned toward the mirror. "The portrait has started forming. That means you've been accepted. Solomon sees you. He recognizes the echo in your blood. I'm not related to him." "You don't have to be," Eleanor said softly. "The curse doesn't follow blood. It follows choice." Thomas looked over his shoulder. "But it helps." That night, the storm arrived. Lightning cracked above the mansion. Rain pelted the windows. The power flickered and finally went out. Mark stood in his room, staring at the key, the ledger, and the letter Solomon had written. The house groaned with age. Then dashed footsteps. He opened the door in the hallway. Candles flickered along the walls. The portraits seemed to move as he passed, their eyes following, their mouths silent. He made his way to the east wing. Eleanor stood in the gallery again. The unfinished portrait had changed. Now, it had Mark's face, not just similar, his exact face. Eyes wide, lips pressed, hair disheveled. The transformation was complete. He stared at it in horror. "How do I destroy it?" he asked. Eleanor looked toward the canvas. "It cannot be burned. It must be erased, with truth." "What? Truth? Why, you said yes." He hesitated. "Say it," she said. "Say the reason." "I needed the money," he whispered, louder. "I was desperate," Mark said louder. "I didn't believe in curses or blood or consequences. I only saw a way out." The room rumbled, the frame cracked slightly. "Say what you feared." "I thought I'd become nothing." The glass on the portraits shook. "And what do you feel now?" Mark looked at his painted self. "I feel like I never should have walked through this door," the canvas screamed. That was the only way he could describe it. The sound tore through the room, not from his mouth, not from Eleanor's, but from the painting itself. The brush strokes unraveled. The face collapsed. The frame burned without fire. Then all fell silent. Eleanor fell to her knees, weeping. The gallery door burst open. Thomas stood there, eyes wild. "No," he shouted. "You don't understand. You've cursed us all." But it was too late. The mirror shattered. The power died again. And deep in the mansion's heart, a voice whispered, "Another cycle ends. But another always begins." The morning after the mirror shattered, the mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a mouth that had finally opened. Every creak in the floorboards was louder. Every gust of wind through the broken windows carried voices, whispers that slid across the hallways like fingers in the dark. Mark couldn't tell if it was real, or if his mind, pushed beyond exhaustion, had finally given in to madness. He stood in the east wing, staring at the remains of the portrait gallery. Frames had fallen. paintings lay in pieces, some torn by invisible hands. The unfinished painting, his painting, was gone. Not destroyed, gone. As if it had never existed. The wall behind it was blank. Eleanor sat slumped in a chair nearby, her eyes distant, her hands trembling. "They've been released," she whispered. Mark knelt beside her. "Who?" "The ones who were bound to the frames. They weren't just painted, they were trapped. Every soul that failed to end the curse, they were captured inside. Their silence kept Solomon alive. And now, they are free," she whispered. "But so is he." Mark looked down the hall. Something in the air had changed. The light was different. The shadows didn't wait for the sun anymore. Thomas was gone. After he screamed the night before, he had fled the gallery. Mark hadn't seen him since, but he could feel him. Somewhere, in the house. Lurking, plotting. He was not the kind of man to surrender. And he had not left the mansion. Mark returned to the study that afternoon. The ledger still lay on the desk. He sat before it, running his fingers over the velvet, feeling its weight like a stone on his chest. The words inside still haunted him. The names, the curses, the promise that no one could truly escape once the binding began. He needed answers, not from Eleanor, not from the past. He needed to face Solomon. He reached for the candle, lit it, and whispered aloud, "If you're still here, show yourself." The flames flickered. The room dimmed in the mirror, across the room. Something moved. Mark stood. His reflection stared back at him, but then smiled. It wasn't him, it was Solomon. The eyes were older, the smile colder. The man in the mirror raised a hand, and though Mark didn't move, the reflection traced a circle in the foggy glass. Mark stepped closer. "I want to end this," he said. The reflection tilted its head. "You're the one who started it. You made the pact. You wrote the ledger. You built this house." Solomon nodded slowly. "Why me?" Mark asked. "Why now?" Solomon raised a single finger and pointed at the ledger. Then, he touched the mirror from inside. Mark reached out and placed his hand on the glass. It burned. Images flooded his mind fires. Weddings, betrayals, coins flipping in the air. The same faces over and over again, men who looked like him. All bound, all broken, all consumed. He staggered back, gasping for air. The mirror cracked once more. Then Solomon vanished. Eleanor found Mark hours later. He sat outside in the garden, staring at the earth. "We need to leave," she said softly. He didn't answer. "Thomas will come back stronger. The house will give him what he wants, if we don't act." Mark turned to her. "How do we stop him?" She hesitated. "There is one more door." Mark narrowed his eyes. "Another hidden room." She nodded. "In the basement. Beneath the furnace." It was built before the rest of the mansion. A root, cellar. Solomon's place of prayer. He stood. "Show me." They walked through the house together. The silence pressed against them from all sides. Portraits still hung, though most were blank now. As if the souls they once captured had taken their images with them when they escaped. In the basement, Eleanor led him to the furnace. A massive iron beast from another era. She pulled a rusted lever. The floor creaked and revealed a trapdoor beneath the coals. They climbed down into darkness. The air was colder here. Thicker. It smelled of ash and rot and something older than memory. Torches lined the walls. Eleanor lit them one by one. The chamber opened into a circle. At its center stood a stone pedestal, upon it another key. This one was silver. Unlike the ornate brass key from the study, this one was plain worn, but etched with a name. Solomon stepped forward. "This is it," Eleanor said. "The final door. The one that seals the curse. Behind it is the original vow. The first written oath. If we destroy it, we destroy the root." Mark picked up the key. The pedestal shifted under his touch. A sound echoed above them. Footsteps, fast, heavy. Coming closer, Thomas, Eleanor gasped. He's found us. Mark turned toward the stairs, but before he could move, Thomas appeared at the top of the ladder, holding a lantern. Going somewhere, he called down. "Leave us alone," Eleanor shouted. Thomas laughed. "You've always been so dramatic, Eleanor, but now I see you were never the rightful heir. You were just the keeper." He descended, one hand gripping the side, the other holding the lantern like a weapon. "Give me the key," he said to Mark. "No, then I'll take it." He lunged. Mark barely dodged. The key slipped from his hand and clattered across the stone floor. Eleanor grabbed it and backed into the shadows. Thomas struck Mark across the shoulder with the lantern, shattering glass and sending flame. Licking along the floor, the old walls caught quickly. Smoke filled the room. Eleanor shouted, "The door there, the seal." She pointed to a slab in the far wall. Mark sprinted toward it, smoke in his lungs, pain in his ribs. Thomas tried to grab him, but tripped on the broken lantern, screaming as fire licked his coat. Mark reached the door. The key fit. He turned it. The stone door slid open with a groan, revealing a narrow chamber lined with carvings on the far wall. Scroll. Ancient. Brown. Fragile. The original vow. Mark grabbed it. The air shifted. The flames stopped moving. Everything paused. Voice reached him, distant, desperate. "Burn it." Mark hesitated. He stared at the scroll. It pulsed in his hands. Solomon's voice echoed in his mind. "To destroy the root, you must burn the fruit." Was it metaphor or warning? He lit the torch, held the flame to the scroll. It caught the paper. Shrieked, not crackled. Shrieked, the room trembled. The key turned red hot and melted in the lock. Thomas screamed behind him. Eleanor cried out. Then silence. Complete, consuming when Mark opened his eyes. He was no longer in the chamber. He was standing in the ballroom. The mirror was gone. The paintings were gone. The house was quiet, not the same kind of quiet as before. This was peace. Eleanor stood beside him, holding a single rose. "I think," she said, "you did it." Mark looked around. "Where's Thomas?" She shook her head. "He made his choice." Mark sat down slowly. The house felt lighter. The walls felt warmer, but in the corner of the room, where the mirror had once stood, a faint outline remained on the wall. Not a painting, a shadow. Still watching, still waiting. The Brooks mansion no longer groaned. Its silence was not heavy, but hollow like a bell that had been struck one final time and would never ring again. Mark stood in the center of the ballroom, the air still smoky, the wooden floor scorched where Thomas had fallen. He didn't see a body. No ashes, no remains. Just a burn mark in the shape of a man reaching for something he could not hold. Outside, the storm had passed. The clouds peeled away like gauze, revealing a sky that looked washed clean. But inside, everything had changed. Eleanor hadn't spoken. For a long time, she wandered from room to room like a widow lost in her own house, touching things with soft fingers, breathing in memories she had tried for decades to forget. There was no light in her eyes. But there was something else, something that looked like quiet. Forgiveness. Mark followed her through the hallway of portraits. Most were empty now. The frames still hung, but the canvases were blank, stripped of their images. Some were curled and brittle. Others looked freshly stretched, like they were waiting to be used again. Only one remained at the very end. Solomon Brooks. His eyes no longer glowed. His mouth had lost its smirk. He looked tired, faded. His painted skin cracked down the middle. Like a reflection in broken glass, Eleanor stared at it a long time. "He was never a monster," she said finally. "He just believed he was greater than death." Mark stepped beside her. "What happens to the house now?" "It sleeps," she answered. "Without the curse, the mansion has nothing to feed on. It won't breathe anymore. It will only exist. Like a grave, like a memory." They stood in silence. Then Eleanor turned toward him. "You could leave now," she said gently. "The curse is broken. The ledger is ash. You have nothing binding you here anymore." Mark didn't answer immediately. He thought of his old apartment, his student debt, the hollow way he had once looked at the future, the man he had been before walking through the Brooks gates. "I'm not the same person," he said quietly. "Leaving wouldn't change that. You owe this place nothing. But maybe it owes me something." Eleanor's brow lifted. "And what would that be?" "Truth," Mark said. "The whole of it." Eleanor sighed. Not in frustration. In understanding, Joshi led him to the library. Not the grand one with high ceilings and ladders, but a smaller study tucked between the conservatory and the west wing stairs. This room smelled like cedar and candle wax. Inside, she reached behind a row of dusty encyclopedias and pulled out a wooden box. She placed it on the desk and opened it. Letters, photos, one small lock of hair tied with a ribbon, a pocket watch. She handed him the photograph on top. It showed a boy, maybe 12, sitting beside a woman who looked like Eleanor but younger. "Softer, that's you," he said slowly. She nodded. "And that's my mother," Eleanor replied. "And the boy was my brother." Mark blinked. "You had a brother," had she repeated softly. "His name was William. He died before his 15th birthday. Fell through ice on the far edge of the estate lake. They never recovered his body." Mark sat, listening carefully. "My parents never recovered either," she continued. "My father blamed my mother. My mother blamed herself. And when my father died, I inherited everything. But I never stopped thinking that William should have been the heir. Not me." She picked up the pocket watch. "This was his. It's been ticking since the day he died." She opened the watch. It was still ticking. Mark leaned closer inside. Engraved behind the hands was the name William Solomon Brooks. Breath caught. "You never told me your brother's middle name was Solomon." Eleanor's hands trembled. "Because it wasn't his middle name," she said. "It was his real name." Mark's thoughts raced. "You mean he was Solomon?" She nodded. "He never drowned. My father faked his death, hid him away, groomed him to inherit everything secretly. But William changed. The things he saw, the things my father taught him. They broke something inside him." Mark stood, reeling. "So the curse didn't begin with Solomon. It began with your father." Eleanor looked pale. "My father wrote the first vow. William took it further. He became the face of the pact. The enforcer," Mark whispered. "You were his sister." She nodded. "And I let him take everything from me. Because I thought I was the one who deserved to be punished." He stepped toward her. "You've carried this alone for your whole life." "I thought I was protecting people." Mark shook his head. "You were burying the truth. But now it's out. And you're still here." She met his eyes. "Maybe that's the price." The next day, Mark began to clean the mansion. He opened windows, let air move through the halls again. Removed curtains, took down mirrors. With Eleanor's help, he boxed up the remaining paintings and stored them in the attic, away from light, room by room. They restored order. The dining room smelled like lemon polish again. The fireplace was lit with real flame. Not shadow. Eleanor moved slower than before, but her voice had steadied. She began reading again. Mark found her curled in corners, with novels she had once forgotten she loved. They had tea together. Sometimes they laughed. One afternoon, Mark found a letter under his pillow. It was written in fresh ink. "Dear Mark, if you are reading this, It means I have finally done what I was too afraid to do. I am leaving the house in your hands, not as a punishment, but as a gift. You reminded me that the past must be remembered, not repeated. Let this place become a sanctuary not for secrets, but for healing. Yours, Eleanor. He ran to her room. The bed was made, the window open. On the chair by the fireplace sat the silver key. She was gone. Weeks passed. Mark searched. No one had seen her. The local post office reported nothing. No travel bookings. No cab rides. No credit cards used. He came to believe she had walked into the woods behind the house and let the trees take her. He honored her wish. He kept the mansion open, not to the public, but to those who needed it. Law, students without homes, women fleeing violence, artists with nowhere to go, people who needed silence that wasn't empty and rooms that had memory. Not malice, the mansion became something new. Not a tomb, a haven. Mark placed the silver key on a chain and wore it around his neck, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what was saved. Sometimes, at night, he still heard voices, but they weren't angry. They sounded at peace. And once, just once, walking past the mirror Eleanor had refused to take down, he saw her reflection. She smiled, then faded. The mansion had been quiet for a month. Not silent, just quiet. The kind of quiet that came with purpose. The rooms no longer groaned. The stairs no longer protested. The wind no longer howled down the chimneys like lost voices. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the Brooks estate was breathing calmly. Mark filled his days with work. He repaired floorboards. He replaced shattered windows. He reorganized the library. In the evenings, he would sit on the back porch and read, watching the forest turn gold as the season edged toward winter. There was something healing in the stillness. Visitors came and went. He let them stay. A young single mother and her son stayed for 2 weeks. A painter stayed for 3 days and left behind a canvas full of color and joy. A law student passed through and helped fix the garden gate. No one asked questions about the house. They only thanked Mark when they left, saying they felt lighter somehow. He never told them the truth. He didn't need to. The house spoke for itself. But on the 31st night, something changed. It started with a knock. Mark was in the study, reading a novel Eleanor had loved, when he heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not at the front door, at the mirror. He froze. The mirror Eleanor had refused to take down stood across the room. For weeks, it had been just a mirror, reflecting nothing but the present. Now, a handprint appeared. Faint. On the inside, Mark rose slowly, his heart thudding. He stepped toward it. The glass was cold. Then the surface rippled. He reached for the key. Around his neck, the silver one Eleanor had left behind. The metal felt heavier than usual. As he touched it, the handprint vanished, and something appeared in the mirror's reflection. A door. One he had never seen before. Behind him, nothing had changed. The room was just as it was. But in the mirror, the door stood wide open. He turned. In a slow circle, no door. He looked back at the mirror. The door was still there. Beyond it, darkness. He spoke aloud. "What do you want from me?" The reflection did not answer, but the key around his neck began to warm. He couldn't sleep that night. The air inside the mansion was thin. Even the garden, which had begun to bloom again, seemed still. No crickets, no wind. Just the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the main hall at midnight. Mark returned to the study. The mirror had gone dark. He stood before it, the silver key in hand. And then, without a sound, the door in the reflection opened further. A voice, soft and distant, came from within. "Come see." Mark took a breath and touched the glass. His fingers passed through. He stepped into a room, made entirely of gray stone. It looked like no part of the Brooks mansion he had ever seen. No furniture, no light source. Yet everything was visible, as if the walls themselves gave off a low, cold glow at the far end of the room. A pedestal, on it a single object. A mirror, small oval, framed in black iron. He walked toward it, and as he drew closer, he saw something written beneath it. Legacy is never destroyed. It only waits. He picked up the mirror. At first, it showed nothing. Then it showed Eleanor, not as she was near the end, but young, strong, full of life. Her eyes were bright, and she wore a green scarf he remembered from an old photograph. She stood in the ballroom, smiling. Then the image flickered. Solomon. The same cold eyes, the same smirk, but he looked older now. Fading. Mark's own face appeared next, but something was wrong. The reflection smiled. Without him smiling, he dropped the mirror. It shattered across the stone floor. The room trembled. He ran back through the door, and as he crossed into the study again, the glass behind him sealed itself shut with a sudden flash. The mirror was whole again, and the key was gone. In the morning, Mark awoke with a cut on his palm. A small, clean line, like a paper cut. He rapped it and tried to forget. But all day, the mirrors in the house reflected things that weren't real. He would catch glimpses of rooms he had never walked through. He saw his own figure pass behind him when he was alone. He heard his name whispered from inside the vanity mirror in the guest room. By evening, he knew something had followed him back. He returned to the secret passage behind the library, the one that led to the room with the ledger, now empty. But when he pushed the shelves aside and descended into the dark, he found a new item on the pedestal. A painting. Small, unfinished. It was him, not smiling, not angry, just waiting. He didn't touch it. He backed away. Slowly, the curse was supposed to be broken. The ledger was gone. The portrait room, destroyed. But something had remained. Eleanor had said the curse fed on truth. And now Mark began to wonder. If he had truly faced his Dot, had he married Eleanor for money? Yes. But had that been the only reason? He remembered her voice, her laugh, the way she had begun to trust him. He had cared for her. He had mourned her, so why had the painting returned? Why? Had the mirror opened again? As he stood in the dark, a single truth surfaced. He had not just inherited the mansion. He had inherited the house's memory. And the Brooks house remembered everything. Even love, even regret, even guilt, and memory that was a form of power. The following day, a visitor arrived. A young woman, quiet, curious. She said her name was Claire. She was traveling across Texas, writing about historical homes for a graduate project. Mark let her in. He gave her the usual tour. She asked about the age of the bricks, the carvings in the doors, the art. Then she paused in front of the large mirror. In the study, it's beautiful, she said softly. Mark didn't answer. Claire turned toward him. It feels like it's watching. He forced a smile. Most old houses do. She touched the glass, and when she did, the mirror rippled. Mark stepped forward quickly. Don't stay too long. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He swallowed the rising chill in his throat. Mirrors, remember? Claire's fingers left the surface, but in the glass, her reflection did not. The mirror in the study would not stop whispering. Every time Mark passed by, it murmured a name, sometimes his, sometimes Eleanor's, sometimes names he didn't recognize, in voices that sounded like the wind running through broken keys on an old piano. Claire had left 2 days earlier, or at least, that was what Mark told himself. She said goodbye at the door, gave a polite smile, then walked off down the gravel path with her camera bag slung over one shoulder. He watched her until the trees swallowed her shape, but something about her visit had lingered. That night, when he passed the study, He saw her reflection still standing before the mirror, frozen. Watching him, she looked confused, afraid. He blinked, and the mirror cleared. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Mark walked the property. He stood in the garden Eleanor once called her circle of breathing. He trimmed the roses, watered the soil, pulled weeds that had no reason to grow in winter. When he came back inside, the front door had closed on its own. On the entry table, beneath a vase of fresh lavender, a letter waited. No postage, no sealed up, just folded cream paper with his name on the front. Marquis opened it. The house does not forget. It does not forgive. You closed the door, but you left the window open. The curse is not in the blood. It is in the remembrance. Sincerely, his. Hand trembled. Eleanor, had she written this? He flipped the page, on the back another symbol. 3 roses, each dripping red ink. He staggered to the mirror. It was still, silent. But he could no longer see himself. Only the hallway behind him. The reflection showed a different world now. The house, but darker. Older, as if it were remembering a time before. Mark existed. Before restoration. Before forgiveness, he whispered. What did I bring back? The glass shimmered. A word etched itself across the surface. Debt. That night. He returned to the hidden chamber beneath the library. The place where the pedestal had stood. Where the ledger once rested. Now, there was a new object. A chair, old wood warped, upholstered in faded red velvet. He stepped toward it. On the seat another letter. Every heir tries to escape. But the house is not a prison. It is a mirror. What you see is what you brought with you. Sit and see. He didn't want to. But his body moved on its own. The second he sat, the torchlight shifted out the room, grew cold. And then he was no longer alone. Across from him stood Claire. Her eyes blank, her lips pale. Her hands held in prayer against her chest. But it wasn't her. It was her reflection. The image from the mirror, and behind her, others appeared. Not spirits, memories. Eleanor, Thomas, Henry, Judith, even Solomon. They stood in a circle. Surrounding the chair watching. Mark tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't move. A voice echoed everywhere and nowhere. Every heir writes their own curse. Now write yours. A book appeared in his lap. Empty, the cover identical to the ledger. But the pages were blank. He looked around. Why me? He asked aloud. Why not end it here? Eleanor stepped forward. Her memories soft, luminous. Because you lived, she said gently. And the house cannot forget the living. He opened the book, his hand moved. A pen appeared. He wrote the first line. I came here looking for an escape. The room, Vibrated. He kept writing. I found a woman instead. And a curse, and a family I didn't ask for. But in the end, I stayed not because I was trapped, but because I chose to remember. The final line appeared on its own. This is the true vow. Not to bind, not to punish, but to carry forward memory, not burden. Then the book snapped shut. The chair vanished. The mirror cracked, and Mark opened his eyes on the floor of the study. The sun was rising. From that day forward, the mirror no longer whispered. The rooms grew warmer. The paintings, those that remained, showed smiling faces, some laughing, some reading, some dancing. Eleanor's portrait, once blank, now hung. In the hallway near the kitchen, she wore her green scarf. She held a mug of tea. She smiled like she was still listening. Mark began writing letters to the people who had visited the house, to their families, to strangers who might need a place of rest. He called it the Brooks Home for Quiet Recovery. No one knew the truth. They only knew it felt safe there. One day, a woman with a limp and a past arrived with no name. He let her stay in the sunroom. She spoke little, cried at night, slept like she hadn't in years. After a week, she left a small note under her teacup. I saw my mother in the mirror. She said she was proud of me. I believe her. Thank you, Mark. Didn't cry, but he kept the note. Framed it beside the mirror. And every now and then, when he passed by, he would pause, not to look at himself, but to see what memory was waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, he saw Eleanor smiling, or sipping tea. Walking away down the hall, wrapped in green and peace. Haunting. Just remembering. The seasons turned quietly after the mirror stopped whispering. Winter faded without snow. And spring crept in through the cracks in the windows, soft and slow. Morning light poured into the rooms without resistance now, and for the first time since Mark arrived, the Brooks mansion smelled not of age or decay, but lavender, lemon oil, and freshly baked bread. The house had become a home, not for the curious, not for the rich, but for the tired and the lost. They came with silent griefs, unspoken aches, the kind that pressed down on a person's shoulders for years, unmentioned. Mark never asked questions. The house did not require explanations. It only opened its doors and let people rest. Sometimes for days, sometimes for hours, sometimes just long enough for a deep breath and a quiet goodbye. Mark had begun to understand the difference between haunting and holding on. The mansion had once clung to pain because no one had offered it anything else, but now it held laughter, music, the clinking of mugs, and the quiet turning of pages. Some days, he still walked the halls in silence, not out of fear, but in gratitude. Every step reminded him he was still here. He was no longer a student, no longer desperate, no longer a man looking for a way out. He was a keeper of memory, not a prisoner of it. On the anniversary of Eleanor's departure, Mark returned to the garden, the one she used to call her circle of breathing. He had restored it as best he could. A wrought iron bench sat in the center now, surrounded by rows of rosemary and white tulips. A small plaque had been placed on the stone path leading in. It read, asterisk, asterisk, for Eleanor Brooks, who remembered so others could forget, who stayed so others could leave. Asterisk, asterisk. Mark sat in the garden just before sunrise, holding a mug of tea. The key she had left him still hung around his neck, not as a burden, but as a promise. He spoke aloud, softly, into the quiet morning. I don't know where you went, or how. You knew what would happen. But I hope you're somewhere green, somewhere safe. He paused. I forgive you. The wind moved gently through the garden, and for a moment, he thought he heard her laugh. That afternoon, Mark received a package in the mail. No return address, inside an old journal, wrapped in green silk, ribbon. He opened the first page. 2. The next who chooses to stay. This house was never meant to be feared. It was meant to be understood. The signature was in Eleanor's careful script. Eleanor, Grace Brooks. Page after page followed. Letters, memories, moments of doubt, reflections. It was as if she had always been preparing this. A goodbye that took its time. Mark read it in silence for hours, and when he reached the final page, it read only, I don't believe we escape what haunts us. I believe we change what it means. Thank you for staying. He closed the journal, tears warm in his eyes. And then he stood. He walked the halls, slowly, letting his fingers drift along the old wallpaper, the banisters, the door frames. Every room felt like it had finally exhaled, and so had he, that night. He found the mirror in the study uncovered. He hadn't touched it in weeks. It had remained quiet. He stepped in front of it, not afraid. He saw his reflection clearly, older still but steady. Then, behind him in the reflection, the ballroom lights began to glow. He turned. The ballroom was dark. He looked back at the mirror. The lights remained. A figure danced alone beneath them. Eleanor. in her green scarf, eyes closed, arms gently lifted, lost in some old rhythm no one else could hear. She looked happy. Then she opened her eyes. She looked at him and smiled. She did not speak. She only nodded once, as if to say, "You did it." And then she faded. Mark didn't move. He only bowed his head, one hand resting against the glass, and whispered, "Good night." Years passed. The Brooks mansion stood firm. It never became a tourist site. It never made the news again. But those who stayed remembered it. Some told their children. Some never spoke of it again. But all of them dreamed of it at least once. And in the dream, they walked down a long hallway lined with portraits not of strangers, but of their own moments of truth. At the end of the hallway stood a man in a brown sweater, holding a book, smiling. And when they asked him where they were, he would simply say, "You're safe here. You're home." And so, the Brooks mansion stood, not as a house of horrors, but as a quiet keeper of memory, a place where pain was transformed into peace, and where one man's choice to stay rewrote a legacy soaked in shadows. Mark Davis entered with desperation, but he left behind something far greater than wealth. He left behind hope. Thank you so much for watching this story until the very end. If this tale moved you, inspired you, or gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful storytelling. And we'd love to know what part of the story struck you the most. Drop your thoughts and let us know where you watched from in the comments. Until next time, stay curious and stay kind.